I stand in the kitchen at 3:15 in the morning, staring at a photograph I haven't seen in years. My hands shake, not from cold, the apartment is warm enough, but from something deeper, something that started 14 days ago when I found that email. 20 years. 2 decades of marriage, of mornings waking beside a woman I thought I knew completely, of believing we had built something unbreakable. The photograph shows Rebecca and me at 27, both of us laughing at something neither of us can remember now. We're at some beach, sun behind us, her hair wet and clinging to her neck, my arm around her waist. I look like a different man in that photograph, confident, unburdened, still capable of believing in the permanence of things. The kitchen is silent except for the refrigerator's low hum. At 51, I'm too old to be naive about how the world works. Yet here I am, learning truths I should have understood years ago. My body aches in ways it didn't when I was younger. My right shoulder injured playing basketball in my early 40s, injury I never properly treated because I was too busy building my career throbs with a dull persistence. My sleep has become fragmented, unreliable. I can fall asleep easily, but I wake at 2, 3, 4 in the morning. My mind already racing through calculations and conversations, piecing together a narrative I wish were fiction. I set the photograph on the counter and make coffee. The ritual calms me slightly. Grounds into the filter, water heated to exactly the right temperature, waiting for the bloom before pouring the rest. These small acts of control matter more than they should. Everything else in my life has spun out of my hands, my career imploded in ways I couldn't have predicted. My marriage is now a structure built on lies. And my own understanding of who I am has fractured so completely, I'm not sure I can ever fully reassemble it. But the coffee, at least, I can control. My phone sits on the counter. The email is still there, has been there since I discovered it. I know every word by heart now, have read it so many times the text has become meaningless, reduced to pure sensation. Rebecca wasn't supposed to work today. She had a migraine or claimed to have one and took a sleeping aid. At 2 in the afternoon, I came home early because my meeting was canceled, and I wanted to surprise her with the lunch she had mentioned craving earlier in the week. She was asleep, which didn't surprise me. What surprised me was her laptop, left open on the kitchen table with the screen still glowing, battery nearly dead. The email was from Thomas. Not the Thomas who works in marketing. Rebecca doesn't know anyone named Thomas in marketing. This Thomas was from her past, someone she had mentioned only once in all our years together, someone who had apparently never been more than a footnote in our shared history. The email was explicit. Not in a sexual way, though there were hints of that, suggestions and memories that made my stomach turn, but explicit in its planning, its calculations, its cold assessment of my career, my value, and how to extract maximum advantage from my vulnerability. I've read articles about betrayal, about trust, about the moment when everything you believed about your life is revealed as performance. The articles always frame it as a sudden collapse, a dramatic moment of revelation followed by necessary action. They don't talk about the waiting, the processing, the endless loop of the same thoughts rotating in your mind like clothes in a dryer, endlessly tumbled but never clean. They don't tell you how you can know something definitively and still spend 14 days, 2 weeks gathering evidence, hoping that maybe you misunderstood, that there's some alternative interpretation of, don't worry about Harrison finding out. He's too distracted with a new role to notice anything. By the time he realizes what's happening, the options will have exercised themselves. Maybe there's a context in which that sentence means something other than what I know it means. The coffee finishes brewing. I pour it into a cup Rebecca gave me for my 50th birthday, a custom print with photographs of us throughout our years together. The weight of this cup in my hand feels like evidence of something, though of what I'm no longer certain. I carry it to the living room and sit in the dark, watching the city sleep outside my window. From our apartment, you can see 3 different neighborhoods, 3 completely separate lives happening at different speeds. The downtown core glitters with its insomniac lights, financial traders, emergency room doctors, bartenders in hotels counting their tills. Further out, the residential areas are truly dark, families sleeping in their homes, children in bed, adults in the other parts of their lives that I can never witness. Rebecca is still asleep upstairs. I came back down to the kitchen because if I stayed in bed listening to her breathing, I would have done something I can't undo. There's a particular kind of rage that doesn't manifest as shouting or violence, but as a quiet, focused clarity. That's what I'm feeling now. That's what I've been feeling for 14 days. My career is in ruins. Not spectacularly, which would actually be easier to explain. If I had failed catastrophically, been fired outright, made some obvious error, people would have understood. They would have sympathized. Instead, I was promoted. 8 weeks ago, I was brought into a senior strategic role, positioned as the future of the organization, given a salary increase and an office with a window and introductions to clients I had been working toward meeting for years. It was, I thought, the culmination of 23 years of work. I started with the company at 28, worked through recessions and market changes, survived 2 major reorganizations, and had finally reached the point where my competence was being recognized at the highest levels. Within 3 weeks, it became clear that something was wrong, not obviously wrong. There were no direct attacks, no insubordination from my team. Instead, there was simply a systematic removal of context. Meetings I wasn't invited to. Clients I had relationships with suddenly meeting with other account managers. Strategic information I needed to do my job being delivered to me hours after decisions had been made. A board presentation I had spent 2 weeks preparing was canceled, rescheduled, canceled again. When I finally delivered it, attendance was minimal. Senior management had previous commitments. My new peers, the other senior strategists, became increasingly distant. Where there had once been collaboration, there was now a careful politeness, a separation that made it clear I was not part of the inner circle that actually ran things. I began to understand that I had not been promoted into power. I had been promoted out of the way. My therapist, whom I started seeing 3 weeks ago because I was having panic attacks at 2 in the morning, asked me what I thought I had done to deserve this. The question infuriated me at the time, but it also forced me to examine whether this was my failure, my inability to navigate corporate politics, my age working against me in ways I didn't fully understand. At 51, I'm older than most of my peers. I have gray in my hair, lines around my eyes. I tire more easily than I used to. My knees hurt after sitting for too long. I had read studies about age discrimination in tech-adjacent fields, understood intellectually that being 51 placed me in a precarious position, that I was simultaneously too expensive and not innovative enough, that the window of opportunity was closing whether I acknowledged it or not. But that was before I read the email. Before I understood that this wasn't about my age or my performance. It was about calculated elimination, and it involved my wife in ways that made the betrayal cut deeper than simple career sabotage. Thomas had been Rebecca's boyfriend in college. They had dated for 2 years, had been serious enough to talk about living together, had ended things, as these things do, when they went in different directions. Rebecca had met me 3 years later. We had met at a party hosted by someone from my company, and there was an immediate recognition between us, a sense that we were solving each other's previously unaddressed needs. She was working in fashion then, was ambitious and creative, and had a vision for herself that didn't include clinging to a man who didn't match her trajectory. I was building my career, was confident in a way that felt like it would never diminish. We got married 6 years after we met. By then, Thomas was a memory so distant neither of us thought about him anymore. Thomas had apparently been thinking about me, calculating, planning. He had built a career in corporate restructuring, had become the kind of consultant who was brought in to optimize companies, which meant firing people strategically and restructuring roles to increase shareholder value. Somewhere along the way, he had apparently maintained a connection with Rebecca. I don't know when that reconnection happened or how long it had been going on. I found only one email thread, which meant either my investigative skills were insufficient or they were hiding it better than I thought. The thread started in March, just before my promotion, and the final email was dated 3 days before I found it. "The new role is perfect," Rebecca had written. "He'll be too distracted with the transition to notice what's happening with the partnership dynamics. And his self-esteem will make him vulnerable. He'll want to prove himself in the new position. Will be willing to take on projects that are actually beneath his level of competence, but that he'll convince himself are opportunities. By the time the numbers come in, everyone will have moved on to the next priority." Thomas had replied, "Can you make sure he doesn't connect with the board? His relationships there are his only real leverage, and if we can position his account management as outdated thinking, we can isolate him completely. The promotion makes sense because it removes him from the ground-level work where his actual value lies. Senior strategic roles require a different skill set, and within 6 months, it will be obvious that he doesn't have it. Then the separation will seem inevitable. He trusts me," Rebecca had written in a later message. "He asked me about his concerns, about whether I thought something was wrong. I told him he was just adjusting to the new role, that everyone has doubts when they move up. He wants to believe me because he wants to believe in us. It makes this easier." I had read this message over 50 times. Each reading caused a physical reaction, my chest tightening, my throat closing, a sensation in my stomach like a fist clenching. I had asked her about my concerns. We had been lying in bed in the dark, and I had told her that I didn't feel like I was succeeding in my new role, that something about the dynamics felt off, that I wasn't sure I was making the right decisions. She had reached over and taken my hand and told me exactly what she later admitted to Thomas that she had told me. She had made me feel less alone, less paranoid. She had made me believe that my doubts were normal, temporary, a phase I would move through. The coffee has gone cold in my hands. I've been sitting in the dark for longer than I realized. The sky outside is starting to lighten, the insomniac lights of the downtown core fading into the context of the rising sun. In 14 days, I haven't told anyone what I know. I haven't confronted Rebecca. I haven't contacted a lawyer or my company's HR department or anyone who might take action. Instead, I've been gathering information like a man building a case against someone I used to love. And that love is the problem, isn't it? Love doesn't stop just because betrayal is revealed. It lingers, complicated and painful, and it makes you want to understand the impossible, to find a way that this all makes sense within the framework of someone caring about you in any way at all. My son called yesterday. He's 24, lives in another city, works in software engineering at a startup that's apparently doing well. We talk perhaps once a month. We've never been naturally close. And as he's gotten older, the connection has become more obligatory than organic. His call was timed well. I was at the office, had stepped outside to take it, and could make my voice sound normal, could ask about his work and his girlfriend and the apartment he's renting. When he asked about me, I told him everything was fine, just busy with the new role. I didn't tell him that his mother had been planning my professional destruction with an ex-boyfriend for months. I didn't tell him that the marriage he had assumed was solid was actually something I couldn't even define anymore. What would I have told him anyway? That his parents were both failures in different ways, and that trust was an illusion we'd all been maintaining for his sake? That there was no such thing as a secure foundation because foundations were made of the same fragile hopes as everything else? I rise from the couch and walk to the kitchen sink, pouring the cold coffee down the drain. The apartment is quiet in the way it is only in early morning before the world fully wakes up. In another hour, Rebecca will come downstairs looking for coffee, and I will need to decide what to do with the knowledge I've been carrying. I could continue pretending. I could delete the email and never mention what I found. Could go on being married to someone who is fundamentally different from the person I believed her to be. That's what a lot of people do, don't they? They discover something, and then they make a calculation about whether the disruption of their life is worth the vindication of truth. They decide to swallow it, to move forward, to preserve stability even if that stability is built on willful blindness. The alternative is to blow everything open, and I'm terrified of what comes after that. I have no idea who I would be in a post-Rebecca world. We've been together for 16 years. She's woven through everything, my career decisions, my relationship with our son, my sense of self. I'm 51 years old, and I'm too old to start over in the way a younger person could. My parents are both alive but aging. And I feel the responsibility of that differently now that I'm in the territory of life where parents become parents to their children in a new way. I have a career that's currently imploding, though I suspect the implosion is more advanced than I want to admit. I have a body that doesn't work the way it used to, and the older I get, the more I understand that the years of physical resilience are genuinely behind me now. This job I'm losing, this might be my last real opportunity at this level. After 55, companies stop calling with these roles. After 60, you become genuinely invisible, and the financial ramifications of that invisibility are something I've been trying not to think about. The sun is fully up now. The city is waking. I can hear sounds from the apartment above ours, a neighbor starting their day, probably making coffee in their own kitchen, probably completely unaware that I'm standing in mine contemplating the dissolution of everything I thought was true. I shower because there's nothing else to do, and because maybe the ritual of morning will help me figure out what comes next. The water is hot and scalding, and I stand under it longer than I normally would, letting it run over my face, my shoulders, the places where my body is starting to fail. At 51, you become aware that your body is a rental agreement you're slowly violating the terms of. Small injuries that used to heal in days now linger for weeks. Muscles that were once reliable become unreliable. You start to understand that you're not getting stronger or faster. You're just getting older, and the only question is how long you can maintain the illusion of strength before you have to admit defeat. When I come downstairs again, Rebecca is in the kitchen. She's made coffee. She always makes coffee. It's part of her morning ritual, part of the facade of normalcy that we maintain. She's wearing the soft gray sweater that I bought her for Christmas, and her hair is pulled back into a bun, and she looks like someone I should love without complication. She smiles at me when I enter, and the smile is so practiced, so rehearsed, that I want to ask when she learned to perform so convincingly. She kisses me on the cheek, and I let her, and I wonder if she can feel the tightness in my body, if she knows that something has shifted, that I'm containing knowledge that's changing the molecular structure of everything between us. "Good morning," she says. "I made you coffee." "Thank you," I say. The words feel strange, like I'm reading lines from a play where the dialogue is very simple and very far from what I actually want to say. "Did you sleep well?" "Better," she says. The migraine finally passed. I feel almost human again. There are 15 words in that sentence. I've counted them. 15 words that are absolutely fabricated, that are designed to support a narrative of illness and recovery that creates cover for the absence of honesty. Or maybe that's unfair. Maybe she did have a migraine. Maybe someone can betray you and also genuinely suffer from migraines. Maybe betrayal and physical pain are both real things that can coexist in the same person. Maybe people are complicated in ways that make it impossible to categorize them as simply good or simply bad. And maybe that's what's destroying me about all of this, not the betrayal itself, but the impossibility of hating her cleanly. "I'm glad," I say. "I was worried about you." She touches my arm, and the touch feels like a confession, like an apology being offered in the language of physicality instead of words. "I know you were. You're always worried about me. That's one of the things I love most about you. I want to ask her how she can say that while simultaneously planning my professional destruction with someone she hasn't spoken to in 20 years. I want to understand the mechanism by which she separates the version of herself that loves me from the version of herself that calculated my weakness and decided to exploit it. I want to believe that there's something in her that's suffering under the weight of this deception, but I'm afraid I know better. I'm afraid that she's compartmentalized so effectively that she's capable of living two complete lives, simultaneously without either one affecting the other. Rebecca, I say, and I can feel the moment shifting, can feel myself on the edge of saying things I can't unsay, and I pull back because I'm not ready, not yet. I need to talk to you about something, but not right now. Later, tonight. Her hand tightens on my arm. What is it? Are you okay? I'm fine, I lie. But something has come up with work, and I need to think through some things before we talk about it. Can we plan to have dinner together tonight, just the two of us? She relaxes slightly. Of course, I'll make something. Do you want me to pick up anything from the store? No, I say. Just yourself. She laughs, and the laugh is light and genuine sounding, and it's the sound of someone who has no idea that I found her out. That's very poetic for you. Is the stress getting to you? Maybe, I say. Probably. I kiss her before I leave, because that's what I do. It's the pattern we've established over 16 years, and I don't want to change the pattern too suddenly. She tastes like coffee and something minty. She brushes her teeth immediately after waking. Another habit I've known about for so long it's become invisible to me. I wonder how many invisible things she's also kept hidden. How many small deceptions build up over years into something this comprehensive. Work is surreal in the way it's been surreal for weeks. I go to my office. I attend meetings where I contribute things that people listen to but don't act on. I send emails that are professionally appropriate but that I know are being read by people who've already decided I'm irrelevant. The senior strategists avoid me. I sit next to Marcus in a planning meeting, and he doesn't make eye contact. I know Marcus from before the promotion. We used to get lunch together, used to talk about clients and industry trends and the ways the company was changing. Now there's a wall between us, and I understand that he knows something I don't, or that he's been instructed to distance himself from me, or that he simply read the room and understood which way the power is flowing. At lunch, I sit in my car in the parking garage and call a lawyer. I found his name 3 days ago, but haven't had the courage to call until now. His office is in a building downtown, and his specialty is divorce and family law. When I explain my situation over the phone, trying to be concise and professional even as my voice shakes, he tells me that what I've described is grounds for everything I'm going to need. He asks me if I want to proceed with a consultation, and I say yes, and we set up a time for Friday afternoon. It's only Monday. There are 5 more days of living in this apartment with Rebecca, 5 more days of performing normalcy, 5 more days of waiting. The lawyer's name is David Rothstein, and when I meet him in his office on Friday afternoon, the first thing I notice is that he's older than I expected. He's probably in his 60s, has silver hair and reading glasses that he peers over at me when I describe the email. He listens without interrupting, takes notes, and when I finish, he leans back in his chair and looks at me with an expression of sympathy that feels earned. "This is not uncommon," he says. Not the specific circumstances, but the general shape of it. Betrayal by a spouse in conjunction with some kind of professional deception. The question is what you want to do about it. I want to understand what happened, I say. I want to know how far back this goes, whether it was planned from the beginning, whether she ever actually loved me, or whether it was all some kind of setup. That's a very human desire, Rothstein says. Unfortunately, it's not something the legal system can help you with. What the legal system can help you with is dividing assets, determining custody arrangements if relevant, and establishing what the financial implications of the dissolution of the marriage will be. Everything else, the emotional truths, the questions of love and intention, that's going to have to be something you process separately. Can you use the email as evidence of infidelity? Infidelity is increasingly irrelevant in most jurisdictions, Rothstein says. What matters more for divorce proceedings is the division of assets and whether any fraud was involved. If you can demonstrate that your wife engaged in deliberate deception that resulted in direct financial harm, for example, if she knowingly provided false information to you about your assets or her own finances, then yes, that can be relevant. But emotional infidelity, even if it involves deception, is usually considered part of the general breakdown of trust that characterizes most divorces. So it doesn't matter, I say. It doesn't matter that she was actively working to destroy my career. It matters, Rothstein says carefully. It matters for your sense of justice and your need to understand what happened. But legally, what matters is that you have an email showing that she was complicit in professional deception alongside someone else. If that someone else is a consultant who was hired by your company, there might be claims you have against your employer for conspiracy or interference with employment. But claims against your wife are going to be harder to prove and harder to win. I feel something deflate in my chest. I had imagined that the email would be a kind of weapon, that I could use it to establish beyond any doubt that Rebecca had betrayed me, that I could make her understand the magnitude of what she'd done. Instead, I'm learning that betrayal is legally ambiguous, that the law has no framework for quantifying the destruction of trust, that I'm going to have to let a lot of this go unanswered in order to move forward. I need to think about it, I say. Take your time, Rothstein says. But I'd recommend not making any precipitous moves until we've had a chance to discuss your full financial situation. If this ends in divorce, we'll need to understand your assets, your income, your retirement accounts, everything. The goal is to protect you financially while we're also pursuing whatever claims might be available. Against other parties, I leave his office feeling simultaneously more informed and more lost. I drive around the city for an hour before I go home, taking streets I haven't driven on in years, passing neighborhoods that have changed in subtle ways, watching the city transform into evening. By the time I arrive at the apartment, it's nearly 6 o'clock, and Rebecca has already started preparing dinner. There's music playing in the kitchen, and she's singing along slightly off-key. And everything about the scene is so domestically perfect that I want to scream. "You're just in time," she says when I come in. "I made your favorite, that pasta dish with the white sauce and the pancetta. I found fresh basil at the market. It smells amazing," I say, and this is true, but it's also hollow. I set my briefcase down, and I can feel the moment I've been waiting for approaching, the moment where I stop pretending and start confronting, and I'm suddenly terrified of what comes after that. We eat dinner. We talk about her day. She spent it with girlfriends, went to a yoga class, ran errands around the city. She tells me about a conversation she had with one of her friends about the friend's marriage, and how the friend is worried that her husband is having an emotional affair with a coworker. Rebecca expresses concern for this friend, gives advice about communication and trust. And I'm sitting across from her knowing that she's simultaneously having an emotional affair with her college ex-boyfriend, and I'm wondering if she understands the hypocrisy of it or if she's compartmentalized so effectively that there's no contradiction she can see. "Can I ask you something?" I say when we've finished eating and she's putting the plates away. She freezes slightly. "Of course. Do you ever hear from Thomas?" She continues putting the plates in the dishwasher, and the slight delay tells me everything. "Thomas? Your colleague? Your ex-boyfriend from college?" She closes the dishwasher and turns to face me. "No," she says. "Well, not really. I mean, I ran into him on LinkedIn a few months ago, and he sent me a message saying hi, and we chatted for a bit, but it was nothing. Just a chat," I say. "Yes. Just catching up." "About what?" "I don't remember specifically. It was probably months ago." "It was 3 months ago," I say. "In March. And you've been chatting with him since then?" I can see her processing this. Can see her making the calculation about what I know versus what I'm saying I know. She's trying to figure out how much I've discovered and how much is bluff. And I realize that she's been doing this exact thing with me for the entire duration of our marriage, probably, constantly assessing what I know and what I don't know and adjusting her behavior accordingly. How did you know it was March? I read your email, I say. The one from 3 days ago. Her face goes pale. For a moment, she's silent, and I can actually see her anxiety materialize into something physical. You went through my email? Yes, I say. That's a violation of privacy. So is planning someone's professional destruction, I say. Let's not pretend you're the victim in this. She sits down at the kitchen table, and she looks smaller suddenly, less like the woman I've been married to and more like someone I don't recognize. It was nothing, she says. It was just planning, just theoretical conversation. Theoretical conversation that somehow resulted in me being systematically isolated from clients and decision-making at my company. That would have happened anyway, she says, and there's an edge to her voice now, a defensiveness. You're 51 years old, Harrison. Your company doesn't value that. Your company values youth and disruption and people who haven't been doing things the same way for 20 years. Thomas just accelerated something that was going to happen regardless. So you did it to help me? I ask. By actively working to destroy my career, you were somehow helping me? No, she says. I did it because Thomas asked me to. I did it because I was curious about what he was doing and because a part of me was still interested in him, and because your marriage felt stale and your career felt stale and everything felt stale, and he offered a way to feel less stale. This honesty is worse than the deception somehow. At least with the deception, there was still a chance that she had been protecting me in some twisted way, that she had been trying to spare me something worse. But this is just selfishness. Just the ordinary betrayal that I probably should have anticipated in a 16-year marriage. Just the aging together of two people who've stopped recognizing each other as the people they married. I don't even know how to respond to that, I say. I'm not asking you to respond, she says. I'm saying that you asked me to be honest, and this is what honesty looks like. It's not pretty and it's not romantic, but it's real. We've been going through the motions for 5 years, maybe more. We don't have sex anymore. We don't talk about anything that matters. We're just two people living in the same space and pretending it means something. So when Thomas got in touch and asked if I could help him with something, I said yes, and I knew it would damage you professionally. And I did it anyway. Because you didn't care about me, I say. Because I was angry at you, she says. And because I was tired. Tired of being the supportive wife of someone who's always working, always stressed, always worried about the next project. Tired of not mattering anymore. You came back from work every day and talked about work, and I would listen, and I would try to be supportive. And you would go to bed worried about work, and I would lie awake next to you, and I felt like I was disappearing. So when Thomas offered a way to stop being invisible, I took it. I want to argue with her, to point out that she could have talked to me about feeling invisible, that we could have worked on the relationship if she had actually tried instead of immediately jumping at the chance to betray me. But I'm also aware that there's probably truth in what she's saying, that I have been present in body but absent in spirit for years, that I have been slowly disappearing into the treadmill of career that has now exploded anyway. Maybe I'm angry because she's right. Because if she had just been patient a little bit longer, my career would have imploded without her help, and I would have had space to recognize what I was losing in the process. I don't think I can stay here, I say. I know, she says. I'm going to need to figure out financial arrangements. My lawyer will be in touch. Okay, she says. The simplicity of her acceptance of this surprises me. I thought there would be more fight, more negotiation, more desperation to salvage something from this wreckage. Instead, she seems almost relieved, like she's been waiting for me to figure it out, like this has been inevitable for longer than I've realized. I pack a bag that night. I'm not making this dramatic. I'm not throwing things into a suitcase and storming out. I'm methodically selecting clothes and toiletries and putting them into a piece of luggage I bring down from the closet. Rebecca watches from the doorway of the bedroom, and she doesn't try to stop me or say anything. And I'm not sure if this is respect for my space or if it's just confirmation that she's been ready to be separate from me for quite some time now. "Where will you go?" she asks when I'm nearly done. "A hotel, probably." I need to think. "I'll have to tell people something about why you're gone." "Tell them whatever you want," I say. The truth or a lie, I don't care anymore. I drive around the city for an hour before I actually check into a hotel. I end up in a chain hotel near the airport, not because I'm planning to leave the city, but because it's far enough away from my apartment to feel like genuine distance. The room is anonymous and sterile, and it feels appropriate somehow. A space for someone who no longer has a home because his home was built on a false premise. I lie in the dark and listen to the sounds of the hotel, other people in other rooms living their other lives. The hum of the air conditioning, traffic from the nearby highway. My phone has been buzzing since I left. Rebecca has texted me twice, both messages neutral, neither one an apology. My son has called once. Apparently, Rebecca called him and told him his parents needed to separate, and he's confused and worried and wants to understand what happened. I don't call him back because I have no idea what to say, because I'd have to explain that his mother had an affair with a consultant while simultaneously working to destroy his father's career, and I'm not ready to be the one who breaks that news. Not ready to put my son in the position of having to choose sides between two parents who have both disappointed him. By Monday morning, I've been checking into my email frequently, watching for any communication from my company. The logical assumption is that my promotion is being walked back, that Thomas has reported to someone that the restructuring is happening as planned, that the setup to eliminate me is now complete, and they're ready to move to the endgame. But there's been radio silence, no emails, no calls, no indication that anything has changed from my company's perspective. I shower in the hotel and put on one of my business outfits, the mask I've been wearing for 23 years, and drive to the office. I'm early, arriving before most of my colleagues. The office parking garage is nearly empty at 7:15 in the morning. I park, and I sit in my car for a few minutes, gathering whatever courage I can find, and then I walk upstairs to my office. The badge still works. The elevator still opens for me. Nothing has changed in the physical reality of my position, but I know that everything has changed in every way that matters. I start going through my files. I'm looking for documentation of my work, emails showing my contributions, minutes from meetings where I made decisions or recommendations. I'm building a narrative that will protect me in what I suspect is coming, a narrative of my own value that I'll need to be able to reference when everything else is taken from me. By 8 o'clock, I've compiled 3 years' worth of material into folders on my computer. At 8:30, I'm called into a meeting with Thomas and my direct boss, Richard Rothstein. Wait, that's not right. My boss's name is Richard Carver. I've been so immersed in thinking about my actual liar that I confuse the names. Richard Carver is the VP of Strategy, is the person who hired me for this role, and is one of the 3 people on this planet who has the authority to affect my employment status significantly. Thomas is not my boss. Thomas is a consultant, someone who was brought in to help with the restructuring. I haven't actually met him until this meeting. He's smaller than I expected, thinner, with a carefully maintained beard and glasses that look expensive. He shakes my hand and tells me it's good to finally meet me. And his smile doesn't reach his eyes. And I wonder how long he's known that I would recognize him as the man who was having an affair with my wife, if that's even the right way to frame it. Richard pulls up a spreadsheet. It's a financial projection for my accounts, showing revenue and productivity metrics. The numbers are devastating. According to this spreadsheet, I've been less productive since my promotion. My client retention has decreased, and my overall contribution to the strategic objectives of the company has dropped significantly compared to my previous performance metrics. None of this is true, which is obvious to me immediately, but it's also been constructed carefully enough that it could be true, could be interpreted as true by someone who didn't have direct knowledge of the work I was doing. Harrison, Richard says, we've been reviewing your performance in the new role, and we've noticed some concerning trends. What kind of trends? I ask. Your client satisfaction scores have dropped. Your project completion rate has declined. And your strategic recommendations haven't been implemented at the board level. I want to point out that my recommendations haven't been implemented because nobody has listened to them, that the information I need to do my job has been systematically kept from me, that I've been deliberately isolated from the decision-making process. But I also recognize that this is the moment they've been planning for. This is where I'm supposed to get defensive or make excuses. And in doing so, I validate their assessment of my inadequacy. I'd like to review the specific metrics you're using, I say calmly, because my understanding is that the projects I've been involved with have maintained or exceeded previous performance standards. That's one interpretation, Thomas says. He slides another document across the table. But when you look at the trajectory of change after your promotion, the picture looks different. There's a clear downward trend that correlates with your shift to this strategic role. Or, I say, there's a change in methodology where metrics have been redefined to reflect a different evaluation system, which would make historical comparisons invalid. Thomas smiles. That's a fair point. But I think what matters from the company's perspective is that we need someone in this role who can deliver strategic value right now, regardless of historical metrics. And based on what we're seeing, that person might not be you. This is it. This is the moment I've been waiting for in some abstract way since the email first became real to me. This is where my career ends, where the promotion that was supposed to be the culmination of everything becomes the instrument of my destruction. I should be feeling desperation, should be fighting to save myself, should be making arguments for my value and my potential. Instead, I'm feeling a strange kind of calm, because I've already accepted that this was going to happen, because the email prepared me for this possibility, because I'm no longer operating under the assumption that any of this was real. What are you offering? I ask. A severance package, Richard says. 2 months' salary, plus your benefits through the end of the quarter, plus outplacement services. For someone with 23 years of service, that's not very generous. The market for seniors in technology is challenging, Thomas says, and there's something deliberately cruel in the way he says it, some satisfaction in being the one to point out what I already know, that I'm old and therefore disposable. We're being generous given the circumstances. What circumstances? I ask. The only circumstances are that I'm not as young as I used to be, and I didn't fight hard enough to protect myself from being undermined? That's not fair, Richard says, but his voice is weak, which tells me everything I need to know about how much real authority he has in this conversation versus how much is being exerted by Thomas and whatever forces Thomas is representing. We respect your years of service, but we also have to think about the future of the company, and the future requires different skill sets. I could negotiate. I could try to get more severance, could ask for extended benefits, could attempt to preserve something of value from this wreckage. Instead, I hear myself saying, I'd like it in writing, and I'd like to have my attorney review it before I agree to anything. Of course, Richard says, but I can see the tension in his face, can see that he was expecting me to be more resistant, more emotional, more desperate. Thomas looks almost disappointed, like he was hoping to see me fall apart, to have that satisfaction added to whatever other satisfactions this has already provided him. I walk out of the office after they tell me I can go home and wait to hear from HR about the formal offer letter. I take the elevator down, and I'm aware that this is probably the last time I'll be in this building in any official capacity, that this is the end of a chapter that consumed most of my adult life, 23 years, more than a third of my existence. And it's ending not with a bang but with a spreadsheet, and a consultant who's sleeping with my wife in a sense that I was never actually in control of any of this, that it was all always going to end this way. And the email I found was just the moment where I finally got a glimpse of how the machinery was working. My phone is ringing as I'm driving away. It's my son. I pull over into a parking lot and I answer. "Dad?" he says. "Mom told me that you're separating." What the hell is happening? I sit in my car in a parking lot in the middle of the city and I try to figure out how to explain 20 years of failing to pay attention, 20 years of being absent in the ways that matter, 20 years of building a life with someone who wanted something entirely different. I tried to figure out how to explain that his mother had an affair that's somehow less important than the fact that I didn't notice she was disappearing until she was gone. I tried to figure out how to be honest with my son about the ways I've failed him. "Can I call you later?" I say, "I need to process a few things." "Dad, come on. Talk to me." "I'm not good at this," I say. "I'm not good at expressing emotional content in real time. I need to think about what I want to say." "Then maybe that's part of the problem," he says, and he's not trying to be cruel, but he is cruel anyway, because he's right. Maybe if I had been better at expressing emotional content in real time, I would have noticed that my wife was disappearing. Maybe if I had been more present, more aware, more engaged in the actual emotional reality of my marriage, none of this would have happened. Or maybe it would have happened anyway, because people are who they are, and you can't change that by trying harder or being better or paying more attention. "I know," I say. "I'm sorry. That's not good enough," he says, and then he hangs up. I sit in my car and I stare at my phone and I realize that I'm having one of those moments where everything you took for granted falls away, where you're forced to see yourself as you actually are rather than as you wished you were. I'm 51 years old. I'm about to be unemployed. I'm in the process of getting divorced from the woman I thought I was going to spend the rest of my life with. My son doesn't respect me. My career has imploded spectacularly, and I have no one to blame but myself, because even though Thomas and Rebecca executed the plan, I created the vulnerability. I created the gaps by being absent, by being distracted, by prioritizing career over everything else, by convincing myself that success would be enough to shore up all the other fractures that were developing. I drive to a bar that I haven't been to in years. It's a place I used to go after work when I was in my 30s, before I was married, before I was trying to be the kind of person who doesn't drink alone in the middle of the day. The bartender doesn't recognize me, which makes sense because probably a decade has passed since I was last here. I order a bourbon and I sit at the bar and I watch sports on the television and I feel like I'm watching someone else's life happen, like I'm an observer who stumbled into a narrative that isn't actually mine. A man sits next to me. He's probably in his mid-60s, and he looks like he's been coming to this bar for decades. He orders a beer, and he nods at me in the way that strangers nod at each other in bars, a recognition of shared solitude. "Bad day?" he asks. "Bad year," I say. "Bad life choices. Those are usually the same thing at this age," he says. "I'm Frank." "Harrison," I say, and I shake his hand. "Lost a job?" Frank asks. "Something like that. I lost mine at 55, Frank says. Worked for the same company for 32 years. They brought in new management, decided I was old, decided they could replace me with someone cheaper. I drank for 6 months after that. Not good whiskey like you're having cheap vodka, because it didn't matter anymore what anything tasted like. Does it get better?" I ask. "No," Frank says. "But it gets different. After about a year, you stop comparing your life to what you thought it was going to be, and you start comparing it to what it actually is. And sometimes what it is not that bad once you accept that the other life was never really available to you anyway." "That doesn't sound very encouraging," I say. "It's not supposed to be encouraging," Frank says. "It's supposed to be true, and the truth is usually not that encouraging. But it's also usually what you need to hear, not what you want to hear." I drink my bourbon and I talk to Frank for another hour. He tells me about the years after his job ended, how he took a job at a hardware store, how he made less money but had more time, how his marriage actually improved once he stopped trying to prove something through his work. He tells me about his kids, who were in their 20s when he lost his job, who were initially embarrassed but who eventually understood that their father was still their father regardless of whether he was a corporate executive or a hardware store employee. He tells me that he still thinks about his old job sometimes, that he still wonders what would have happened if things had gone differently. But mostly he's just accepted that things didn't go differently, and that acceptance has given him something resembling peace. My wife was sleeping with a consultant, I tell him, and she was also helping him sabotage my career. She was part of the setup. Frank nods slowly. That's harder, he says. That's not just about your job. That's about the people you trusted with your life. Yeah, I say. You'll get through it, he says. Not because you're strong or resilient or any of that bullshit. You'll get through it because you have to. Because the only other option is lying down and dying, and even if you wanted to do that, your body probably wouldn't cooperate. At 51, you've still got maybe 30 years left if you're lucky. That's a long time to be dead while you're still alive. I leave the bar after a while and drive to a hotel. I spend the weekend not really doing anything. I read emails from my lawyer. I check in with my son, who's still disappointed, but slightly more willing to talk to me. I try to process the fact that my entire life has basically transformed in the space of 2 weeks. Monday morning, I get an email from my company's HR department with a formal severance offer. It's more generous than what Thomas and Richard described, which means either Richard fought harder for me than it appeared, or there's something else going on that I don't understand yet. My lawyer reviews it and tells me to accept it, that it's a fair deal given the circumstances, and that I should use this time to figure out what I want to do next. I don't know what I want to do next. For 23 years, the answer to that question has been, whatever helps the career move forward. The career has now moved forward into oblivion. So I'm back to a question I haven't had to ask myself since I was in my 20s, which is what I actually want versus what I think I should want. I move out of the hotel and into a rental apartment in a different part of the city. I sign the severance agreement. I accept the outplacement services from my company, which means meeting with a career counselor who is probably in her early 30s, and who keeps using the phrase digital transformation as if it's going to somehow make me relevant again. I have a meeting with my lawyer about the divorce where David Rothstein explains that I should expect Rebecca to request her share of our savings in the house, and that if I want to fight those requests, I can. But it will be expensive and ugly and ultimately probably not worth it because the law is set up to split those things relatively equally anyway. Can I sue her? I ask. For sabotaging my career? You could try, Rothstein says. But the burden of proof would be very high. You'd need to demonstrate that she knowingly and intentionally took specific actions that directly resulted in quantifiable financial loss. The email shows intent, but proving causation is harder. And meanwhile, she can claim that she was trying to help you by pushing you away from a job that was toxic, or that her actions were incidental and that your job loss would have happened anyway. The law is not set up to provide remedies for emotional harm or betrayal. It's set up to handle financial matters, so I can't sue Rebecca. I can't get any legal vindication for the betrayal because the law, apparently, has no framework for betrayal. I can only divide the assets we accumulated together and move on with my life. And that moving on is the hardest part because I have no idea who I am outside of the context of that job and that marriage. 2 months after the email, I'm meeting with a recruiter who's trying to place me in senior strategy roles at other companies. He's a young man named Jason, probably in his 30s, and he's very enthusiastic about my background and my experience. He's less enthusiastic when I mention my age. When he realizes that I'm looking for a role that will essentially be the same role I just lost, at a level that I don't have access to anymore because companies don't promote people at 51. We could look at director-level positions, he suggests, or maybe strategic advisor roles at smaller companies. Director level is a step down. Strategic advisor is a step down and a step sideways. I'm watching my career compress before my eyes, the trajectory that I thought was upward suddenly being revealed as something that peaks at 50 and then declines inexorably. The people I was working with at 50 are now my age plus however many years it's been. And I'm competing with people who are 40 and hungrier and don't have my baggage, which is all of my years of experience, apparently has become baggage. I end up taking a consulting role with a boutique firm that does strategy work for mid-sized companies. The work is interesting in some ways and boring in others. The pay is significantly less than I was making at my old company, and the instability is higher because consulting contracts are often short-term and contingent on continued success. I'm building something new, which is what everyone kept telling me I needed to do. But I'm also aware that I'm building it at 51 when most of the people building things at this level are building them at 35 or 40. And that temporal difference is something no amount of skill or experience can fully overcome. I see Rebecca wants to sign the divorce papers. We meet at a coffee shop near where we used to live together. She looks different, thinner, or maybe just less put together. Or maybe I'm just seeing her clearly for the first time and realizing that a lot of what I thought I was seeing was reflection rather than direct observation. We don't really talk about anything substantive. We talk about logistics, about who's handling the sale of the house, about what she's doing with her time now. She tells me that she and Thomas are not together, that he disappeared after my job situation was resolved. And apparently that was always the plan, that he was never actually interested in a future with her, just in whatever temporary arrangement served his purposes. She sounds almost bitter about this, which makes me feel sorry for her in a way I'm not entirely sure I should feel, given that she actively participated in my destruction. I'm sorry, she says before we leave. For all of it. I know, I say. I'm not sure if I forgive her, but I also understand that forgiveness is not actually going to change anything. She did what she did. I didn't pay attention when I should have. We both ended up here. The question now is just what we do next, and I'm still not entirely sure about the answer to that. Months pass. I'm doing work that doesn't feel like my work, living in an apartment that feels temporary even though I've been there for 4 months now, dating occasionally with the vague sense that I'm going through the motions of what 51-year-old divorced men are supposed to do, without actually believing that any of it means anything. My son calls more frequently, though the conversations are still stilted, still navigating the tension of my failure to be present in his life for the past decade. I tell him I'm sorry, and he says he appreciates that, and we both hang up still not entirely understanding each other, but at least willing to keep trying. I'm at a gym, something I've been doing since losing my job, because apparently when you lose your job and your marriage, simultaneously, the thing you're supposed to do is get in shape, which I find deeply ironic given that my body is falling apart in ways that no amount of exercise can fully arrest. I'm on a treadmill, running slower than I ran 10 years ago but faster than my body wants to go. And I'm watching a television that's showing financial news, and there's a story about my old company, about some major restructuring that's happening, about senior management changes. I slow down and listen. The restructuring has apparently gone badly. The new strategic direction that they were building toward didn't work out the way anyone planned. Revenue is down. Clients have left. The board of directors is implementing changes, and several senior people are being dismissed. I recognize one of the names. It's one of the people who is part of the effort to undermine me. Another name is a board member who I never met, but who is probably involved in the decision to restructure the company the way they did. I don't feel satisfied by this information. I thought I would. I thought that if my old company failed after pushing me out, if the people responsible for my departure faced consequences, it would mean something. Instead, I just feel tired. The company failing doesn't give me my job back or my marriage back, or the years I lost to believing in things that weren't real. It doesn't validate me in any meaningful way. It's just information about other people's failures superimposed on top of my own. Thomas disappears from the news cycle not long after. Apparently, his consulting firm faces a lawsuit from one of their clients. The restructuring he implemented at a different company was even more disastrous than the one at my old firm. He becomes something of a cautionary tale in business articles about the dangers of aggressive restructuring and consultants with poor understanding of organizational culture. I wonder if Rebecca sees these articles. I wonder if it gives her any satisfaction, or if it just reminds her that she made a choice for someone who turned out to be not worth the choice. I call my lawyer about pursuing action against Thomas or my old company. Rothstein listens to the story about the failure and tells me that it's too late now, that if I wanted to pursue claims, I needed to do it when it would have been preventative, not after the fact. Winning a lawsuit against them now wouldn't change anything, he says. It would just drag out your trauma over several years while depositions happen and lawyers argue about details. It might be better for you to just move forward. Move forward. That's the advice everyone gives me. Move forward. Stop looking backward. Stop comparing what is to what was supposed to be. Stop dwelling on the ways you were betrayed or the ways you failed. Just move forward, so I do. I get better at my consulting role. I develop relationships with the mid-sized companies that are my clients. I start to understand that there's something satisfying about work that doesn't consume your entire identity, about being able to go home at 6 and not think about the job until the next morning. I'm making less money, which means I need to be more careful about expenses, which means I'm suddenly aware of how much money I've been spending on things I don't actually need. The house that Rebecca and I owned is sold, and the proceeds are split between us. And I used my portion to pay off some debt and to start saving again, slowly, without the assumption that I'll ever be wealthy or secure again. I'm 53 when I accept that this is probably my life now. Not a tragedy, not a triumph, just a life. A life where I work and I try to spend time with my son, and I try to be the kind of person who doesn't spend all his time regretting the past. I'm 53 when I actually forgive Rebecca. Not because what she did was okay, but because holding on to the anger is more exhausting than letting it go. I'm 53 when I accept that my marriage ended for a lot of reasons, not just betrayal, and that some of those reasons were legitimate. I'm 53 when I stop checking the news to see what happened to my old company and when I delete the articles I'd been keeping about Thomas's consulting firm because none of that matters anymore. I'm 53 when I actually go on a date with someone and stay present for it instead of comparing them to Rebecca or to the life I thought I was going to have. Her name is Sarah, and she's 48, and she's been divorced for 3 years. And she has her own complicated history with work and marriage and the ways things don't turn out the way you plan. We get dinner and we talk. And neither of us pretends that this is the beginning of a grand romance or that this is going to fix everything. We just treat it as what it is, two middle-aged people spending an evening together and seeing if there's anything worth continuing. My son calls me after I've been seeing Sarah for about a month. "So you're dating again?" he asks. "Sort of," I say, casually. "Good," he says. "I'm glad. I was worried about you after the divorce. Worried that you were going to disappear into your work again and miss out on living. I already did that," I say. "That's what got me here in the first place." "Then don't do it again," he says. "Just try to be present. With Sarah, with me, with your life. That's all any of us are really asking for." I'm 54 when I have this conversation, and I'm aware that I have maybe 30 or 40 years left if I'm very lucky, and that I've already wasted so much of the first 30 that the obligation now is just to not waste the next 30 in the same way. I can't get back what I lost, not the marriage, not the years at my old company, not the time I didn't spend with my son while I was building something that turned out to be mostly illusion. but I can try to be present for what comes next, and maybe that's enough. Maybe that's all anyone can hope for when you reach the point in your life where you finally understand that control is an illusion and that the future is not something you build, but something you just try to navigate with as much grace as you can manage. I'm sitting at the kitchen table in my rental apartment on a Tuesday morning, and I'm reading an email that I just received. It's from David Rothstein, my lawyer, and it's informing me that Rebecca has married Thomas. They got engaged 3 months ago, apparently, after he came back into her life once his consulting firm's legal issues were resolved. She changed her mind about him after he had disappeared, and now she's changed her mind again. I read the email twice, and I wait for the expected emotions, rage, betrayal, a sense of vindication at this chaos in her life. Instead, I just feel empty. It's someone else's story now. What happened between Rebecca and me is in the past, and what's happening with Thomas is in a future that I'm no longer part of. The only real question is what I'm doing, and the only answer that matters is that I'm here, and I'm trying, and that's going to have to be enough. I delete the email. I make coffee. I go to work and I do my job, and I do it well enough that my clients are satisfied and my colleagues respect me. I go to dinner with Sarah and I'm present for it. I call my son and I ask about his life, and I actually listen to the answer. I go to bed at night and I sleep, most nights, without being jolted awake by anxiety at 3 in the morning. The nightmares have mostly stopped. The rage has mostly dissipated. I've accepted that I'm not the person I thought I was, and that the life I'm living now is not the life I planned, and that's okay. That's more than okay. That's just what happens when you get to 54 and finally understand that plans are just suggestions and that life is what happens. When you stop fighting against the reality of who you actually are and what you actually have. I'm 54 and I'm starting over, and I'm aware that starting over sounds dramatic and suggests that I'm becoming someone new, but I'm not. I'm just becoming someone slightly more honest about the person I've always been. I'm someone who made mistakes, big ones, expensive ones, ones that cost me time and relationships and money and years. I'm also someone who's still here, still willing to learn, still capable of being present for the people who matter to me. I'm someone who wasted 2 decades becoming someone he wasn't supposed to be and who's now spending his remaining decades trying to figure out who he actually is. It's not a redemption story. It's not a story where justice is served or where the bad people get punished or where the good people get rewarded. It's just a story about a man who paid attention too late and who's now trying to make better use of the time he has left. And that, I finally learned, is enough.